Hi guys, welcome back. In this video, we're going to be discussing about the consumer price index, also known as the CPI, which is used to measure inflation. Now we need to understand that inflation is usually measured annually, and changes to those rates of inflation is calculated by constructing a consumer price index. And that is exactly what we're going to be studying in this video. How is that constructed? So make sure that you watch the video till the end. Now guys, whenever we have an inflation rate in front of us, which is calculated using the consumer price index, so that is basically reflecting the prices of those goods that consumers are typically buying. That is what an average family of households is buying, basically. So, what we mean is that actually makes the CPI very much relevant to the households because it reflects the price changes of their spending. So, what we are trying to say is that the inflation rate basically that we are getting or which we are calculating using the CPI as a measure is telling us the prices of those goods and services which are rising because of the inflation that consumers are actually buying. And that exactly makes your CPI relevant to households because it is reflecting the price changes of their spending. That is the spending of an average consumer. Now let's see, how do we construct a consumer price index? Now before I jump to the consumer price index, I first want to make you guys understand what index numbers are. And before that, even let me tell you that consumer price index, so consumer price is a different word. Consumer price just represents the prices of the goods and services that consumers buy. And when we associate the word index to it, it means that the consumer prices or the prices of those goods and services that an average household buys, those prices are converted into an index number. So instead of looking at prices like, let's say, $10, $15, or maybe, let's say, $1,000 or $15,000, we are looking at prices as an index number. Now let's see what an index number is. Why do we use index numbers? Now we've already seen that index numbers are used in, when you're collecting GDP data, or measuring GDP data, or comparing GDP data, or maybe even comparing exchange rates, or maybe the inflation rates. We've also seen that index numbers are also used in the terms of trade. Now, you need to understand that the reason why index number is used is, so first of all, what happens is that whatever raw number we have, right, we basically convert it into an index number. Now, how do we convert it? I'll show you that. There's a formula to it. But then the reason why index number is calculated is because it sort of simplifies your large numbers, as in your long numbers. Some numbers are ridiculously long, right? So the objective of converting those numbers into an index number is to simplify those numbers and make them appear more simple and easy, so that when you compare or when you are calculating the data and comparing it over the years, or maybe calculating the rate of changes, it becomes quite simple and quite quick, right? So for example, let's say if I have export prices that are given in 2005, and let's say that in 2005 is my base year. Base year simply means the year that will be used as a comparison, or the year which will be used to compare all the other years, as a standard year to compare all the other years, right? So let's say the export prices of goods and services are $114,938,670. Now this is a huge number, a long number, and believe me, this is just a hypothetical number that I've written. The actual numbers of the data that is collected by the government officials is quite huge, whether it is export prices or even the price of the basket of goods, right? And so, or maybe house prices. So, and let's say in 2006, the export prices rises to $120,685,604. Now, again, this is a very huge number. Now, if I were to ask you to sort of calculate the percentage increase in export prices, you would calculate the percentage increase by, taking this number and then deducting it by this number and then again dividing it by this number times 100. Now this is a long process. What if I were to ask you that the index of export prices in 2005 was 100 while the index of export prices in 2006 was 105, and if I was like deduct 105 from 100 and calculate the percentage change, instead of calculating the percentage change of these house prices, calculate the percentage change by comparing the indexes. Now 100 and 105 is quite simpler than these two numbers, right? Than these two numbers. Because it will make my calculation very quick and simple and easy. And I can easily see, okay, fine, you know what? Because comparing 114938670 by 120685604 is, even by looking at it, is difficult for me to sort of figure it out whether the prices have gone up or gone down. I can't even figure that out, right? But if I look at 100 and 105, I can easily figure it out that, the prices have gone up because the index has gone up. So remember that indexes are simply a conversion of the prices of raw numbers, or they're just conversions of the raw numbers into an index number form. You need to know that, right? And the index number for a base year is always 100. Okay, so either the index number will go above 100, that is 101, 105, whatever, till whatever extent it goes, or it can go below 100 as well. Now, remember the base year always has an index value of 100. So and remember that any year can be the base year. Usually the base year that we choose is a standard year where no dramatic changes have been made. Now the formula to calculate the index number is you take the raw number and you divide it by the base year raw number times 100. Now I'll use this formula, and then later on in the video I'm going to show how do we convert the price of the basket of goods into an index number. So right now I'm not diving into the formula. I'll use this formula later on in the video. So the purpose was to just tell you that a lot of people don't know that what an index is. So students don't really understand consumer price index and what is the purpose of an index. So the only purpose of an index is to just make simplification of our numbers that we have, raw numbers that we have. So if you're calculating a consumer price index and you're taking a basket of goods and then you're summing up whatever items there are in the basket of goods and you're summing up their prices, so obviously the figure could be relatively huge because you're summing up so many items in that basket. So what you do is that then you later on convert those prices into an index number so that the inflation calculation becomes simpler. So, take it this way. This is so simple to understand. Now let's see how is the process of inflation. How do we actually calculate CPI, right? How you need to understand and know the process, right? So first of all, what happens is that in Pakistan, the CPI is calculated by the Pakistan Bureau of Statistics, and in the UK it is done by the ONS, that is the Office of National Statistics. Both are government organizations. So in Pakistan, you should mention that yes, it is done by the BBS, that is the Pakistan Bureau of Statistics. And what happens is that they conduct a survey, and that survey basically it's a household survey. It's basically an expenditure survey, family expenditure survey is conducted, where different families households are surveyed. That the government officials of the PBS will try to figure out what households are usually buying, what quantities they are buying, what prices they are paying for the goods and services, and most importantly, what percentage of the income is spent on those goods, right? So whatever goods they are buying, we're not only seeing that what goods they are buying, in fact, we're also seeing that how much percentage of their income is spent as an expenditure on those goods. And where are those goods bought from, right? So once that data is collected from that survey, then what happens is that a basket is constructed. Now when we say that a basket is constructed, it simply means, now here the basket does not mean an actual basket, it simply means a collection of those goods and services that are most popular among the household's expenditures. So when you say that a consumer basket is collected or formulated, it means that the consumer basket of the most popular items of goods and services is formulated. And remember that in Pakistan, we're going to see that this basket will consist of those goods and services, that is, those goods and services will feature in the basket or reflected in the basket. That basket will actually reflect the spending of an average family or a typical family of a Pakistan or any country, basically, right? It should reflect the spending that is the spending of an average family, not of a very, very rich family, neither of a very, very poor family, because that will just result in biasness then. It will not be a true representation of whatever expenditure is being done in the nation then. So the basket will represent what an average family in Pakistan will basically buy. Now guys, remember, this is something that this is additional knowledge. I mean, I would mention that if this question would have come, so according to the Pakistan Bureau of Statistics and also according to the State Bank of Pakistan website, in Pakistan, this basket basically consists of 487 items. Now imagine you are adding up the prices of 487 items in a basket. That will definitely be a huge number. So that is why in index, those prices are converted into an index. So the basket consists of 487 items which are collected from 40 different cities and 76 different markets. Right? If you mention this information, that's fine. If you don't mention it, that's okay as well. But it's not only about information, it's about knowledge as well. So basically, after this process is done, once you formulate the basket, the next process or the next step is that weights are assigned, right? And so the goods and services are then assigned weights. And weights basically represent the percentage of income that is spent on goods and services. So let's say, for example, if food is represented in that basket, but only 10% of income is spent on food, then the weight that will be assigned, or the rank that will be assigned to the food, is only 10%, right? So this is very important that you need to know. And why are weights important? The weights are very important because you also need to understand that, let's say if the price of an item or a good goes up, right? So let's say if any price of an item of that particular basket goes up, and that particular item in the basket, it could be any item in the basket. If that is going up, then, and if that particular item is representing a huge proportion or percentage of the income that is spent of average households on that particular good, then we would obviously want that rise in the price of that particular good to be represented or featured or be part of the final inflation rate. That is why, weights play an important role. What I'm trying to say over here is that if, let's say, any particular item of any in a particular basket is representing a major proportion of the income that is spent on that particular item of an average household, and the price of that particular good goes up, right? The price of that so let's say if it could be fuel. So for example, if fuel is very expensive right now in Pakistan, and everyone uses fuel, so a major proportion of our expenditures goes up in fuel because it's a part of our everyday commute. It's used in that. So if the price of fuel goes up, we would want the increase in the price of fuel to be reflected in the inflation rate. So that is why fuel would be given a higher percentage, or it would be given a higher importance, or it would be given more weightage, right? Because that increase in price, we would want that to be featured in or represented or be part of the final inflation rate. Then after that, guys, what happens is that once you sort of assign the weights, you basically calculate the weighted prices. And how are weighted prices calculated? They're calculated by multiplying the weights with the prices of the goods and services in that basket. And then all the weighted prices are then added up. And then once they're added up, they're converted into an index number. So for example, if you see over here, I've given an example as well. So for example, let's say that once you add up the entire basket of goods and services and you add up all the weighted prices, so the weighted prices that have been added up in 2005 are $10,000. Let's say 10,500, and 2007 they are 11,235, right? So I've given imaginary numbers to it. And let's say that 2005 we are taking as the base year. So the consumer price index would always be 100. The reason why consumer price index would be 100 for a base year is because the formula to calculate index is, remember this, the formula to calculate index is raw number divided by the base year raw number times 100. So the raw number over here is 10,000 divided by the base year raw number, that is also 10,000, times 100. So the answer would obviously be 100. Now remember that here when you are multiplying by 100, you're not calculating a percentage. In order to calculate an index number, you need to multiply that ratio that you get out of dividing the raw number by the base year raw number. You need to multiply it by 100. Okay. So it's not a percentage that you're calculating, and don't think that you're multiplying it by 100, so you're calculating a percentage. You're actually converting into an index number. So basically, that is why the CPI for a base year is always 100, because that satisfies the formula basically. So then let's say that now if I want to calculate the consumer price index in 2006, so what I'll do is that I'll apply the same formula, that 10,500, that is a raw number, divided by the base year raw number, that is 10,000. I'll multiply it by 100, so the answer would be 105. And if I want to calculate the CPI in 2007, I'll use the same formula, that is a raw number. Look, I've done it over here as well. Raw number, that is 11,235. 11,235 divided by the base year raw number, 10,000. You always divide it by the base year raw number, remember that. 10,000 times 100. So the answer would be 112.35, right? Now 112.35 is representing the index, the CPI in basically 2007. Now, first of all, we can see that the CPI is rising from 100 to 105 and then 112.5. So these three numbers are quite simple and easy to calculate. So if you want to calculate the inflation rate, the formula to calculate the inflation rate is new index minus old index divided by the old index, multiply by the 100. So let's say if you want to calculate the inflation rate in 2006, what you'll do is that the index is 105 minus the old index in 2005, 100 divided by 100. Here, when you're multiplying by 100, you're actually calculating the percentage change in inflation rate, right? So the answer would be 5%, which means that in 2006, the price level went up by 5%. And by the way, if you also calculate this percentage change, it would be 5%. But like I said, we don't need to do that because we have converted these numbers into an index. And in 2007, if you want to calculate the inflation rate, it would be simple, the same formula, 102.35 minus 105, which is the new index minus old index, because I want to calculate the inflation rate by comparing 2007 with 2006. So I want to see that if the index in 2007 is 102.35, then what is the by how much did the price level went up? Because these are consumer price indexes. These are price indexes. Consumer price indexes. That is expenditure done by the average consumer on the basket of goods. These are reflected. These are price indexes of those particular of the prices of those particular goods and services. So 102.35 minus 105 divided by 105 times 100. Here when you are multiplying by 100, calculating the percentage change, the answer should be somewhere around, it should be 7%. So which means that the inflation went up by 7% in 2007. So that's how you calculate the inflation rate, and that is how you calculate the CPI. Now, basically, what you also need to understand is that here you need to know what weights are. I've also mentioned this before in the video as well. I'm going to just repeat it again. That, guys, the weights are basically representing the economic importance and how much of a good, basically, and how much proportion of a consumer's expenditure does it basically represents. And the thing is that the problem is that what would happen if we do not multiply the average prices by the weights? So if we do not multiply the average prices by its weights, then the problem would be, then let's suppose assuming that we don't do that. So what's going to happen? What's the problem with that? Now the problem is that, for example, if an item, let's say good A. Now good A, let's assume that it has become expensive by 40%. The price of good A has gone up by 40%. Now, okay. Now the problem is that if we do not do that, it would be reflected in the inflation rate that we calculate using the CPI. But the problem with that is that this particular good only represents 1% of consumers' income. Like, consumers don't really spend that much on it. They only spend 1% of their income. So even if the price of this good rises by 40%, I mean, featuring it in the inflation rate would mean that, this would then become a significant, the rate would then, the rate might, actually go up somewhere around 40% then, the CPI rate then. It might go up somewhere close to 40%, right? It would feature heavily basically in the inflation rate. The figure might go up around 40% or approximately 40%, or maybe less than 40%, but not significantly less than 40%, somewhere close to 40%. And that is a problem, because this good is only representing 1% of consumers' expenditure. So consumers don't really care even if the price is going up by 40%. So then the inflation rate that is featuring that extent of increase in price should feature the extent of the increase in price based on how much consumers actually spend, or the percentage of expenditure that they do on goods and services. Because then if the price is going up, basically, so I'll just put it forward in a different way. So if the price of goods and services is going up, right, then that increase in price then should also reflect, the increase in price should also reflect how much expenditure on that particular good was done by the consumers. If the price is going up for a particular good by 40%, but that expenditure only represents 1% of a consumer's expenditure, then it would then the inflation rate would mislead then, because inflation rate would go up by, let's say, somewhere around 35 to 37%, for example, I'm hypothetically speaking. But then, honestly, people would be like, oh my God, the inflation rate is going up by 37% and that's a problem. But in fact, it's not a problem, because the reason why the inflation rate has been so high is because that particular good was very expensive, but that good is only representing 1% of a consumer's income, and consumers don't really care about it that much as well. So multiplying it by the weight would be a true representation of the so the weighted price would be a true representation of the consumer's importance in terms of expenditure on a particular good. Because now the basket would truly represent the goods and services that an average household or a typical household buys, and then the prices of that basket of that goods and services would be weighted prices that would represent, how much on an average family spends on goods and services, what proportion of their income they spend on A, B, and C. So that proportion of income would be reflected in that prices, which would be a true representation of the relative importance of that good. Now, so that's actually the process of CPI, and I would just sort of try to wrap this up by giving you a quick summary, basically. So guys, first we discussed basically that a CPI basically is a measure of inflation, and it starts by sorting through a large collection of survey data from which a basket of goods and services is formulated, and that reflects the consumer habits of an average family in a nation. That's we studied in the start. And then these goods and services are then weighted accordingly to the quantity that is brought by, multiplying the average prices of the goods and services by the weights to provide a weighted value of the basket when all the prices are added up. So when all the prices are added up, this is representing the weighted value of the basket. And I would want you guys to just hang on for a bit, because the next video will actually be a numerical example of the inflation calculation, that how weights are multiplied by the average prices. So, and then a base year is basically selected where the raw values of the basket in that year is given the index value. Let's say in that year basically is given an index value of 100, and then the annual changes in the raw value of this basket are indexed. The annual changes in the raw, that is these annual changes in the raw values of the baskets, are basically indexed and then compared to the base year with a simple percentage change calculations between the annual index figures, generating, let's say, the inflation rate year on year. And what you also need to know is that every year the basket of the goods that we have selected will basically be updated so that it reflects the changes in consumers' habits and weights, right? Because at times certain goods and services might not be, people might not buy them, or maybe people might start buying new goods. So that basket should reflect the new habits of the consumers. That is what I've written over here, is that basket is updated yearly to reflect these changes in consumer habits. That consumers, so for example, those goods that consumers do not buy anymore, or those goods that they are now buying will leave or enter the basket. And then the weights will also be updated and changed accordingly, right? And the weights, not only will the basket be updated to reflect changes in consumer habits, but the weights are also changed to reflect the changes in the proportion of income that is spent on the basket of goods and services. So that's all, guys. That's all you need to know about the CPI. I'll see you all in the next video. Until then, take care.